Now, the next area that I want to consider with you is looking at when you're studying F6 and when you're preparing for it, let's just talk about the things that you should do and the things that you definitely shouldn't do. So do's and don'ts. So helping you thinking about, preparing to sit this particular paper and how you should best spend your time to make sure you're successful when you sit the paper. So when you go into the paper, as we've said before, there are 5 questions. So what you should always do is whichever one you are best at, you should do first. By the time you go into the exam, you should know which ones you're good at and which ones you're not, whether you're good at income tax or whether you're good at corporation tax. I always recommend you start whichever one you feel that you can do best, because that's going to build your confidence. That's one of the important things in this subject, is to be confident and to believe and to know that you are definitely going to pass with a good mark. Now, what I recommend to students is that they should start with question 3. Remember, that's the one on capital gains. So I always suggest you start with question 3 and then do the VAT and then do question 2, the company question, corporation tax, and then do 1 and then do 4 and 5 at the end. So that, I would say, is my advice. But at the end of the day, if you're not very good at question 3, then obviously number 1 point there is to start with your best question. So that is the most important thing. So start with your best question. That's the first do. Now, the next do is to basically looking at time management. So look at the mark allocation for each part of your question and determine how much time you have to spend on that question. And I always recommend that you do the number of marks times 1.8. So, for example, if it's a 25 mark question, then that means you've got 45 minutes to do the question. I always advise you to write at the top of the paper when the time that you start the question and the time that you're therefore going to stop it. So, for example, if you start at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning, so you'd write 10 a.m. as your start time. And if your start time is 10 a.m., you write 10 a.m. as your start time, and then you would write down your stop time 45 minutes later, so that you don't think, oh, what time did I start? And you've forgotten, and you're sort of trying to work backwards as to how long you've got to spend on the question. So start and stop is very important. When you're in the paper, then, you remember you've got the 15 minutes of reading time. So that's a very, very important 15 minutes. So you can use that to read the requirements. And you've got to think about how you're going to do the question. Think about what you've got to calculate. Read the requirements very, very, very carefully. So sometimes the examiner will ask you to work out the income tax liability, and sometimes he's going to ask you to work out the income tax payable or repayable, and ensure that you answer what he wants and not what you think he wants. So be very careful to read the requirements carefully. Think about, also before you start, think about the pro formas that you're going to need to use and plan your answer before reading the question. Next, the next do is to read the question. You can, remember in your 15 minutes of reading time, you can make brief notes on the exam paper as you read through and identify what part of the question is going to help you to do part A and what part is going to help you to do B and so on. So mark on your exam question during the 15 minutes of reading time what bit is for A, what is for B, and what is for C, so that when the 3 hours starts, you can get straight into doing the question, not wasting any time. Plan the layout of your answer. Make sure the numbers are all in a straight line, one below the other. Make sure you get all the marks for presentation. It's very important, and so that you don't have all the numbers sort of higgledy-piggledy. It's nice to have them all in one straight line, one beneath the other, so the examiner can see exactly what you've added up to get your total figure. So layout, think about the layout and the presentation and plan your answer. Very, very important. Do practice as many past exam questions as you can, because the more you practice, the better you're going to get, the more confidence you're going to get, and the faster you're going to get. And the more questions you practice, the more likely you will to pass the exam. Now let's look at some don'ts. One of the things you mustn't do is waste time on things that you don't know. Because it's a rote learning subject, you know if you know something and you know if you don't. If you don't know it, then don't waste time doing it. Just move on to something that you can do. Time management is very, very important in this paper, and you must be fast and you must be accurate, and so therefore you don't waste time. Don't waste time doing things that you're not asked to do. So if he asks you to do one calculation, then do that one. Don't say, oh, here's everything I know about this topic, I'll give you this anyway, because that's just wasting time. Don't waste time. Remember that you've got to read the requirements at least 3 times, once at the beginning and once after you've just started, and then once again at the end, to make sure that you've covered all the parts of the requirements. So don't forget to read the requirements. All right, very, very important, at least 3 times, okay, very important. Don't waste time and don't forget to read the requirements. Maybe this is a sort of an obvious one, but don't give up. This is a very easy exam if you've practiced and you've learned. It's a very straightforward exam. As long as you've practiced and you've learned and you've practiced and you've learned. Stick to your time, don't waste time, and read the requirements and you will pass. But don't give up. If you can't do something, there are other parts of the paper that you can do, and make sure you do those. Don't make up your own rules and your own pro formas, because if you do that, then you're going to fail. Don't set up the pro forma that you think you might need and make it up. I mean, you've got to set up the pro forma that you need and use it. Don't cut corners. Don't cut corners and try to skip steps, because if you do that, then that's very easy to fall and fail. So don't make up your own rules. Don't cut corners. Set up pro formas with all the lines that you need, and don't miss bits out, because that's fatal. Time management is very important, so don't waste time. That's important. So do's and don'ts.